That is amazing how much stuff he has.
What a collection.
It is a big one. It's
almost too much stuff.
All kids love log.
'Tis the podcast log.
Yes, log.
Of the Star Wars Collectors Archive blog. Oh.
Yes, log.
Whenever the Star Wars Collectors Archive publishes a new blog, this podcast will log its contents, interview its writers, and go deeper. It's the Kivecast Blog Log Pod.
You, sir, are a mouthful.
Relax and just take life easy for a little while. Because it's only lasts for a little while.
All right, Steve, no fancy intros. It's the Blog Log Pod.
Exactly.
I was trying to remember. I think this is the fourth one. Is that right?
That sounds about right. Fourth or fifth. One of the two.
You think that we should know. We're going to be recording the entire episode with Fratastic Pete, our market watcher. This is going to be like this great auction history. Like, we're going to do our best to sort of try to do a full story of high-end, high-profile Star Wars vintage auctions.
Yeah, we could call it Profiles in Vintage History.
Yes, you could. Which is a play on the term Profiles in History, which is an auction house, Steve.
Yes.
You have to explain it to our audience. They're all idiots. If I seem like I'm in a funny mood, Steve, I think I might have mono. So,
oh, God.
I don't know. I went to the doctor today. I'm all tired, and I had blood taken, and my throat hurts. So,
oh, no. We're going to have to keep your energy up here.
Yes, I just know that the second the episode's over, I'm going to take some NyQuil and go to beddy bed. So this is the basic idea, Steve. We're gonna stay tight.
Yes.
There was an auction last month, the Hakes Auction, and it wasn't the first of these kinds of auctions. But I think it's important to note that really vintage Star Wars toys have only been handled by serious auction houses, or have been given what I would call the auction house treatment. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is different than an eBay auction, or your sort of general next door neighbor auction. It has a certain high level of cachet, and I think,
publicity too. Yeah.
Yes, tons of publicity. If you've been paying attention to Star Wars collecting at all in the last couple of months, you've seen hundreds of ads for this auction. And what I was thinking would be really interesting would be to really emphasize the fact that this is new. It's only been in the last couple years that vintage Star Wars toys have been auction house worthy collectibles.
Yeah,
and
right.
In particular, 9 years ago, there was an auction held at San Diego Comic-Con.
Yes.
Called the Premier Collectible Auctions.
Right.
And this was supposed to be the first in a series. It was a high-end auction. I think it was run by Brian Semling
and Tom Derby, together.
Right,
yeah.
And Tom Derby. So the two biggest names in vintage dealers. I would still put them at number one and number two in the history of the hobby, in terms of volume and importance. And they got together and they did this thing, and they put together this catalog, which we're going to talk about in detail. And they billed it as the greatest toy auction on Earth. And as we will see, most of the important pieces went unsold.
Right, yeah.
And many of them sold for under what they were listed for right after the auction. Mm-hmm. And the great auction houses of the world shrugged their shoulders and said, "Come back again, Star Wars, when you're real." And sometime after 2012, that started happening. And so that's what we're going to be that's the narrative flow to this episode. We're going to be talking about prices, and we're going to be talking about money, which is interesting. But I think it's more interesting to follow how the hobby is developing.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm losing my voice, Steve, right? Because I'm hardly talking at all.
Hey, it looks like we have Pete.
We do. All right, great.
Yeah.
So we are going to add him to the call right now. I'm just going to I'm just going to hit this right here and see if Pete's on there.
The magic add button.
Yes, the magic add button. Are you on there, Pete? Of course, that was way too cool, Steve. I've been really worried lately that I have too much of a radio voice. I don't know. Like, do I talk on the show the way I talk normally?
Yes, I think you do.
Okay, good, because I don't want to be one of those guys, you know. Speaking of one of those guys, Pete's got a great radio voice.
One of those guys.
Oh, is that him?
That's him with this famous underwater microphone.
Underwater microphone? Really? Is it that bad?
Okay, Space Freaks, we're going to pause it and come back with Pete on the other side. Okay, so we're back here with Fratastic Pete. We figured out his microphone thing. It's partly because of his voice. It's just too smooth for our human ears to hear. It drives iguanas crazy, but humans can't hear it. How's it going, Pete?
Awesome, man. How are you guys?
Doing good.
We're excited because this is your time to shine, and we want to talk about your blog log about the Hakes Auction. But we thought we'd sort of go on a journey first. Now, have you paid attention to a lot of the older auctions, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that are out there, the big ones that come to mind, I think it was it Celebration 3 or Celebration 4 where they did the LFL auction?
That was Celebration 4, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, so that was Lucasfilm selling off items from its archives.
Right.
But that was like a silent auction, right, Steve?
Yeah, what I remember, it was a silent auction, and it was to benefit a charity, if I remember right. And I just remember, I think it ran over the whole convention, and it was just stuff from their, like, extra stock from their licensing archives that they were auctioning off for, it might have been Make-A-Wish, if I remember right.
Right.
Makes sense.
And I only know of the realized price of one item. I got my Trilogo Emperor. I think I got it for $110, if I remember correctly.
I think I got my B-wing pilot for like 35.
Yeah,
it's the one I have in my collection. Yeah.
And that's awesome.
It was weird because I almost got it AFA graded because they offered you a service where you could get it graded and have it say it came from
that's right.
the Lucasfilm. And I actually regret not doing that because that would have been kind of neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple pieces that I picked up from Brian a few years ago, just mint and sealed box stuff for my Jedi collection that I needed to fill in the blanks on, and a couple of them came from there. So it's just got the normal CIB from Derby on it, just basically saying it originated in the archives and stuff. But yeah, it is kind of it's a cool little added touch.
Yeah, and part of the problem that we have is that, Steve, how many? Oh, just so you know, Pete, I should let you know, I've developed this term. What's the term, Steve?
I don't know.
Auction house worthy.
There you go.
Right. that the phenomena of vintage Star Wars toys being auction house worthy is relatively new. And so talking about the old days, like I've never been to a Star Wars live auction, like in my life. So
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we want to talk to you about it, but then we also want to kind of take a dive through the past. Which means, as we're contractually obligated to do, Steve, we have to talk to two people every month. Who's that, Steve?
Well, the first is Chris Georgoulias, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then good old, I think you called him Ron in the message. I don't know if that was a typo or not, but
Did I? That's right, I did. Yeah, Ron. Yeah, Ron R.A. Salvatore. So we're on a little bit of a tight schedule here. So here's a fun idea, just to set our palette straight. As we kind of go throughout this, Pete, why don't you throw out one interesting item from the Hakes Auction just to set people's brain in one space for 2017?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I kind of look at the Hakes auctions and kind of taking all the different things that are going on in the hobby, all the trends, everybody being so focused on pre-production, being focused on both 3D and 2D on that side of the coin, I'm going to pick out the Lando Calrissian Power of the Force hand-cut proof card. There's other auctions that are more worthy to talk about, but just to kind of kick things off and kind of look at one thing that's very cool, very unique, and rare unto itself, that kind of stands on its own. You don't see many one-sided cut from proof sheet proof cards, and this was one that really kind of, with a key figure like that or a key character like that, really kind of stood out against kind of the palette of everything else that was out there for this auction.
All right, and what did that sell for?
$57.17.
Okay, so almost, no stupid games this month. Just so you know, I've looked at all the prices and stuff. So
yeah. Okay,
so almost $6,000, which for a one-of-a-kind, borderline major character, that's okay. That's a good borderline. So let's call Chris Georgoulias, because he's a busy man. He has to get back to fixing his Christmas tree. So I want to see if I can add him onto this call in that cool way that I do. All right, well, we're here recording at the end of the world. It's taken us about 10 minutes to get Chris on the phone. I don't know if you know this, Chris, but on my cell phone, it was before I started the podcast that I put in your name. And this is the way I spelled Georgoulias. Georgouaisu.
Well, that works. I guess there's nothing else close. So
no, there's nothing else close. So you are, as I predicted, working on your Christmas tree, which is very serious business down there. But we just want to talk to you a little bit about sort of interesting historical auctions. We're going to get Ron on to talk about the PCA auction. And at some point, we want to talk about the Vegas auction, but I don't even know what the Vegas auction is. So can you at least tell us what it was?
I didn't know much about it at the time. I think it was around 1993. I think Todd Chamberlain went. I don't know whose collection it was. I just know that there were a lot of Kenner store displays there. I don't know where they held it. But I learned about it after it happened, like years after it happened, I think. So it was just one of those after-the-fact things. So that's all I know. I don't know who it was, like I said, but I'm pretty sure it was like 93.
Okay.
But there were some pretty epic vintage Kenner store displays in that auction. But I don't know what else it had in it beyond that.
Okay.
That's what it's known for.
Yeah. So that will stay steeped in legend. I don't think, Pete, that this is the end of the big auctions we're going to have you on. So we can tease the story of the Vegas auction in the future. Last time getting Todd Chamberlain on the show, it just was so hard. It took like it was like the hardest thing we've ever had to do. So we'll do that. We'll have to really prepare for that. So what's the sort of next big auction in history after 93 then?
Wow, it was dead for a while.
Yeah, that was sort of an odd thing. I don't remember there being major like Star Wars things like Star Wars auctions. In 2002, there was one of the things they did for Celebration 2 was they organized an auction there. I don't know how much you know about that.
No.
Yeah, they it was sort of loosely affiliated with the collecting track. David Gall was the auctioneer.
You know what? Now that you mention that, I do remember that. I think I just stumbled in there and walked out not much later, but I remember David doing the auctioneering.
Yeah, so they put a thing out. It was on on StarWars.com. They put out a request, hey, we're going to have this auction. Basically, it was just like, I guess it was affiliated with the collecting track, more or less. Gus would know for sure on that. It must have been, because it was really, they just put the word out to people and said, hey, we're going to have this auction. If you want to submit items, you could do that. And a lot of people had things that they wanted to put in there. There was, I know Hollywood Heroes put in, there was artwork, and I think it was artwork for the Power of the Force planetary maps. Those were there. There were some unproduced doll outfits from Jane Abbott that they were brokering. I remember John Kellerman put a set of the acrylic stars, the crew gift stars.
Wow.
There was more. There was another Kenner employee that Jordan was repping. He put in some items, and there were some other things. It's funny because that kind of stuff, I don't even know if it's documented anywhere. I would say that auction probably lasted about an hour, and there must have been, I don't know, I would say 25 to 40 lots maybe. But I remember a lot of them, they were worried about reserves and stuff, and people didn't want to get left holding the bag. And so a lot of things had like crazy high opening bids. So there was so much that just didn't sell. It would go up, they would throw out these numbers looking for bids, and it's like, nope. And now there was probably 50 people in the room, maybe. I think it was in the panel room, now that I think about it. But it was its own thing. And I remember one time, John Kellerman, after the fact, he was so mad because they sent 1099s out to people, so they had to pay taxes on their on their item, and
right.
that he was so mad about that. But they only did that one time. Well, no, I take that back. So that was sort of like a calling all people. You could put things in the auction. So that was, it was 2002. So we jumped from 93 to 2002. I can't remember any other auctions before then, but I think it was around 2005 that Morphe's, the auction company, I think they're based out of Pennsylvania, they auctioned Leonardo DiCaprio's toy collection.
Wait, what?
I think that was around 2005.
Wait, really?
Yeah. There was a catalog there's a hardbound catalog, the Morphe's catalog. Yeah, he was a collector of some note, mostly because, oh my gosh, Leonardo DiCaprio was collecting toys, right?
Right.
But he wasn't like on message boards, or if he was, he was doing it under some,
Yeah, he went under the name Jake Repus.
Yeah, but it was a real thing. I think he bought most of his stuff through dealers and whatnot. But I remember he decided to get out, so that was they were touting it as the Leonardo DiCaprio collection. He had most of the stuff was and this was sort of pre-grading. AFA really came onto the scene around Celebration 2-ish, I think. They had a booth set up, and they were just sort of, it was the one guy, Chip, who formed the company, and they were sort of there. People weren't interested, it didn't get a whole lot of traction there early on like that. So DiCaprio stuff, wasn't graded. Most of it was general condition, and nothing great. But it was like G.I. Joe, Star Wars, He-Man, a lot of those 80s lines. But that was sort of a big deal in terms of just just chatter about it, like, oh, this collection. But I don't remember. There wasn't ever anything really spectacular in there.
Right.
It was just sort of like, oh, own a piece that used to be his. So that was 05-ish, I believe. And then I think the next big one I can remember was the Premier Collectibles Auction in San Diego in 2008.
Right.
Coinciding with Comic-Con. So I think you're going to talk to Ron.
Yes.
Pete,
by the way, Chris, we now call him Ron. So
Ron.
That's his temporary nickname. I did a typo earlier today, and we're having fun with that.
All right. So Ron, and Pete can tell you about that. And that was, Brian Semling and Tom Derby got together for that. So it was 2008. Um, 2007. I'll back up a year. So that was the Lucasfilm auction, Celebrations 4 in L.A.
Right.
Where I was around that time that, in fact, I think it was Celebration, I want to say it was Celebration 3 and maybe even 2, maybe it was 2. Lucasfilm was starting to clear out their marketing stuff, their archives that they had. I almost want to say it was Celebration 2 or 3. I'm sorry, I didn't do any prep on this. I should have, sit down and write these things out. But
it's okay. This is the new Lo-Fi Kivecast, like you said. So.
All right. Nobody's prepared or anything. But they brought truckloads of books from their warehouse to Indianapolis. And basically, you could go in there they gave you a bag, and you could go through and fill the bag and leave. So it wasn't even an auction. It was sort of like Lucasfilm just letting stuff go. And people were just really excited. And I remember the one person, Duncan Jenkins, poor Ann, who was packing me with this, because they had foreign editions of books. And, Duncan has to have one of everything in every size and every language. So I don't know how many times he went through there to get stuff, but they were loaded. And, books are the worst. You're just hauling them from the convention center to the hotel and then through the airport and home and all that. But so that started Lucasfilm. So they gave, all that stuff away. And I think that must have been Celebration 3. I think Celebration 2, they donated all those Ewoks.
Yeah,
some
the
droids,
cels.
Slides,
yeah.
and those animation cells. So we gave those away through the collecting track, and people were in there just piles and piles of those. Cause they were going to get rid of them, and I think when Gus heard it, he's like, "Hey, just give them to us. We'll hand them out." So
wait, so I'm starting to see an interesting narrative here that I didn't really piece together, because I remember Lucasfilm getting rid of their stuff because they did this weird thing where they gave away a ton of their excess licensed stuff to Tuesday Morning and Goodwill and these weird sort of thrift store. Oh, you're going to get there.
Right. So so I'm sort of leading up to them starting to unload stuff at Celebration. So
I thought
Celebration
that
2, they were unloading all those slides.
Okay.
I think then that means Celebration 3 must have been the books. And then so Celebration 4 is about the time, you're right. So they were trying to get rid of their marketing archives were just loaded up, or their licensing archives just loaded with product. And about that time, the explosion of Episode 1 stuff on top of, the old stuff they just had too much product. So all these samples they'd gotten. And you're right. So they initially had given it away. It worked with some company to donate things to charity. They ended up in thrift stores in Berkeley. I think it was in Berkeley.
Yes, I went there. I bought a.
Oh, you went there. Okay.
I bought a weird. I bought a Jar Jar tie, and a frisbee, and I've since destroyed both of them. But I remember seeing pictures much later of Duncan there, the same day I went. I didn't know who he was back then, and so it was really funny because he basically bought the entire store. So yeah, it was this really weird thing of my brother, Lobart was like, "Hey Skye, Lucasfilm is emptying their archives at this thrift store." I was like, "Yeah, wait, what?"
Yeah, it was an odd thing, and they also that place also sort of cherry picked some of the good stuff. I remember they put things on eBay also, and I remember them selling full single color sets of the Yuppie figures, the little mini. Really? One piece. Yeah. You could buy a whole envelope full. They weren't going cheap, but it was holy crap. You never saw these things before, and all of a sudden you could get the whole set in one color, and they put those in, I think it was at least 3 or 4 different auctions, an orange set and a blue set and what. But, so those were initially there, and those went through eBay and, got to collectors that way. And then I think that predated the convention, which was that July 07?
Yeah.
2007 in the summer. So then they brought things officially, and they had an official charity auction at celebration in a big auditorium. They had things on display, and they really cherry-picked the better stuff there. There was a lot of vintage product. They brought in glass showcases, and they were on display, and you could, review all these things and figure out, kind of what you wanted to bid on, by the time. So when the auction came through, you'd already seen them. They have a view as a regular viewing, and they just bring stuff on the stage and walk it through, and people were, just with your paddle, you had your little number, you registered the bid, and you buying stuff. And I remember, like Sonic Lance Beater and lots of box ships. I think there was sand crawlers in there, some Spanish, big Spanish colorful plush Ewoks. Lots of stuff. There were carded figures. There was a lot of vintage product. And I remember when Tom Derby was sitting in front of me, and he was like, he basically hold his paddle up and was like, he would constantly win lots because he had guys that were just going to pay him so much more for, the items. But it was an open auction, and it was a big auditorium. There was tons of empty seats in there. But, that auditorium held hundreds. It would have held hundreds of people, but there weren't nearly that many people in attendance. It was pretty sparse. But and I don't know, there's probably people that took photos of those displays, and I may have photos of displays, but many showcases were, it wasn't in the room. I think it was outside, more around sort of like a little bit off to the side of the main floor, so that you could review all that stuff. But anyway, so that was part of them getting rid of their license, those archives. And then somehow related to, I don't know how it ended up, but there was a little town outside of, near Petaluma, in fact, because we were out there visiting Steve Sansweet, and they're like, and we went to, it was Windsor, and it was like this old building that had like old plumbing supplies in it.
Okay.
It was sort of like an old factory building almost, in like a warehouse area, and and not like a large city warehouse area, but more like country warehouse, small area. And there was, I remember going up the front, like all these bicycles are out front, and they had this banner, like I think it was like a Taco Bell banner or something, strung across the front. And you went in there, and this was like old pipe fittings and stuff, but then there's like boxes and boxes of episode 1 stuff, and all this stuff kind of spread all around. And I remember, it was like hanging from shelves, and then things stuck on shelves, and just tons and tons and tons of episode 1 product. But I do remember a bunch of vintage model kits in there, and some like older vintage era books and stuff, all Star Wars, all from their stuff. But as you sort of snaked your way around how they had it all laid out, I remember get to one point there was like old medical supplies in there, like walkers and like like bedpans and stuff. I'm like, what the heck? It's so weird. I definitely took photos of that place in there, but that was another sort of gold mine that Steve would go down there and shop, and Duncan Jenkins would come to town and go in there and shop, and that was still all related to those people that got the stuff originally from Lucasfilm. And there was some bad blood in there, like it was originally supposed to be given out for charity or sold for charity, but I think that kind of flopped. I thought there was one point they talked about the idea of taking it to Celebration, but I think, or maybe it was the second round of books, but they didn't want to do it at that point because it was too expensive. They didn't want to spend the money to truck all that stuff to the convention. So I think that's probably when it was in Indianapolis again. So anyway, I started to backtrack right there. Anyway, so there's sort of like segue of how Lucasfilm sort of slowly got into like seeding things at Celebrations, and it culminated with that auction, and then how some of that other stuff kept filtering out at the end. And I don't know how long that little place lasted at Windsor. It was sort of like a word of mouth. You had to know where it was. It wasn't like you drive by. But I mean, it was open. You could just walk in there and, buy stuff. So,
so this is great,
anyway,
because we had you to come on to talk about a specific auction, and we haven't even gotten to that auction yet. This is
got there. I don't even know what year. So I don't know what year I'm up to right now with that Windsor thing. That was 2007. So maybe it was 2008-ish, 2007 we went there. And then fast forward, another auction.
Because what we really
So I'm supposed to talk about the BOBa Fisher auction. That was 2011.
Right.
So
This surprised me. I thought the BOBa
getting
Fisher
there.
auction must have been a long, long time ago because BOBa Fisher is this mythic figure. And we've talked about him a little bit, but can you just do a sort of quick intro again on him, Chris?
Yeah. So his name was Robert Fisher. It was by Bob, and then he did artwork. He was a pretty good artist, and he signed his stuff. He went by Bob, so he'd write Bob with a small A, so it said BOBa.
Before we get back to the rest of Chris's explanation of who BOBa Fisher was, let's hear David Johnson and Peggy Finnegan from a news report from 1990 describing the second largest collection in the world. Special thanks to Xbox Fanatic for this clip up on YouTube that looks like, clicking on his thing, I think that's Chris Botkins. I'm not sure. Is that you in that little picture, Chris? Anyways, whoever Xbox Fanatic is, thank you for putting up this this image. Oh, actually, and if you go to Xbox Fanatic, that's spelled with a PH, there's also a good clip of the Celebration 6 room sales. But here is the news report on Bob Fisher.
Well, finally tonight, has it really been that long? It's been 13 years since the movie Star Wars was released, but for some, the Force is still with them.
That's right. In tonight's edition of That's a Lot Large, Jack comes up with a prime example.
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, namely Monroeville, Bob Fisher managed to accumulate what is acknowledged to be the second largest collection of Star Wars memorabilia in America. Bob won't put a price tag on what his enormous collection is worth, but says it's easily worth more than the rest of the house and his lot.
Give me a good example of how some of these things can appreciate in value.
Like the tie bomber. I think it was issued originally when my wife spent $11 or $12 on it. The price tag's still on the box. But in the last toy shop edition, there was one in there for $750.
Fisher has an especially large collection of a movie never made, The Revenge of the Jedi. Actually, the movie was made, but the title was changed to Return of the Jedi, but not before these items were turned out. It just doesn't stop. There's the bubble gum, unassembled models, plates, clothes, including slippers, socks, T-shirts, the masks, all the related record albums, even rare cards on the subject from other countries.
If you met George Lucas, what would you say to him?
Stick him up.
I met so at large.
That is amazing how much stuff he has.
What a collection.
It is a big one. It's
Almost too much stuff.
And that's where everybody called him BOBa Fisher because it was Bob with the little A. And he, so he went back, he was collecting, he was an older collector back in the day in the 80s, and he had young kids and he was, really into it himself. And they did, he'd have Star Wars Halloween stuff and Star Wars birthday parties for his kids, but he was also buying the thing himself. He's trying to sort of collect with them, but also collecting on his own. And, just got really into it. He was, like I said, he was a good artist and he was into doing artwork. I mean, in the early 90s, I don't know how they made the original connection. I don't remember, but he got in with Steve Denny pretty early on. And they did a lot of trading and sort of pen pals and would, they'd videotape each other. They'd do walkthroughs of their collections and stuff. And they'd trade videotapes back and forth. And a lot of the older collectors in those early 90s, they did that kind of stuff. And he, he did artwork.
Is somebody like
newsletters.
Is somebody eating?
It's not me.
Peter, are you eating over there?
No, sorry, I'm moving stuff around on my desk. I'll stop moving stuff.
I don't mind if you're moving stuff around. It just sounded like it was like, pizza. Okay.
Pizza.
That does
Can't
sound
spell
like
pizza without Pete, right?
Yes, that's right.
Anyway.
Okay, so you were saying that you were getting back to BOBa Fisher.
Yeah. So he did his artwork graced the cover of many of Steve's newsletters at the time when he'd send out his mailing lists, and then the cover art would be by BOBa. And he painted the inside of he painted like furniture he had in his display cases and things, and desks and things in his collector room. He painted them with these space scenes. He painted the walls, and he's sort of famous. He had made up a frame for the 62 Power of the Force coins, and he made another frame for droids and Ewoks. He did a limited run of those, maybe a dozen or 20 or so, and sold those to various people, friends of his and stuff, really cheaply, but just to make something that people could use for display. So he was sort of famous for that. So he was sort of like one of the last of the older guys at that point, because other guys at that point, Steve Denny had sold most of his stuff, and Walter Steuben, who I think Ron's talked to you about in the past, he was a prolific collector in the 80s as well. And, he had since sold his stuff off, and there was another collecting couple in Virginia, the Mitchells, and they had divorced and split up, and their stuff had sold off. And so, among those guys that used to do their little trading and their pen paling stuff, BOBa was sort of one of the last ones. When he passed away, and he probably passed away like a couple of years before, but in the years before that, when he was, in his later years in life, other collectors, had befriended him and stuff, and, they, bought quite a bit from him. But after he passed, his kids decided to, auction off the rest of the collection, because, it's a lot of stuff for anybody to deal with. It's bad enough even for the collector to deal with themselves,
Yes.
They all, know what it's like to have that kind of baggage, even with, a modest sized collection. But you start getting into just like when you're trying to collect everything, when you're indiscriminate and you're buying, and it's like, oh my gosh, so it adds up quickly. So they had the auction and worked with some small company. He lived in Pittsburgh, or in that Pittsburgh area. So they worked with a little company there that put on the auction. They advertised it online, but they were very explicit. Like they weren't going to really they weren't going to do mail order. But at the beginning, they were sort of entertaining the idea of taking bids on items, but then they had no way to fulfill that. So that ended up getting scrubbed, and basically you had to go to Pittsburgh. I think it was a Clarion Hotel, and show up, and they had rented, this big ballroom, and there were just table after table just loaded with stuff, and it spanned all eras. He collected right up until he passed. So, stuff up through at least 2009, I think. I forget if he passed 1 or 2 years before that auction. So it was some pretty new product in there, as well as old product, and he was, there was some custom stuff here and there, but just like, he had lots of dioramas in his house, and they basically took all the dioramas apart, and you could go, they had these little tray lots, so these little cardboard trays, and they would just, you'd bid on a tray, and it was to be filled with random stuff. So before the auction, you can go through and you could take notes on stuff and say, oh, lot number, whatever, you can put some notes like, I'm going to bid on this. It's got this and this in it, or, just take notes on condition. But people, a lot of people came around, but it was right when Hurricane Sandy hit. So the New York guys, none of those guys made it because they were dealing with weather, so they didn't want to drive out or fly out. But a lot of guys from the Ohio club came, the DC club and the Pennsylvania club. Those are the biggest ones. I flew up, and Elling, Hogan, and Ross Cuddy flew in from Canada, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some people in there. But that's the general makeup. So then, and then otherwise, if there were other collectors, I didn't know them that well. But then there was just, regular, local fans and things that had heard about it that came. But it was an all-day affair, and they sold, lot after lot. I think they had a break in the middle, but he was like, I remember James Simpkins was sitting behind me, and he bought so much Sigma ceramic stuff. It was unbelievable. He had a giant, and when you'd win, they'd walk out with the item and say, lot number whatever, but if you'd walk back and forth, you'd bid on it, and if you won, they just go hand it to you.
Oh no!
And then James had this mountain of stuff around him. There was enough seats everybody could kind of spread out. A bunch of us were, I was on the front row, so I could see better, but really, yeah, or people could start a pile in some corner or whatever. It was very loose as far as rules and whatnot. But pretty much, it was one of those things like you needed to be there if you were going to get anything. And
did you go home with anything?
Yeah, I bought a few things. I bought one of the things I really liked was he had it was sort of like homemade foam core poster. Oh, it was like a display. It was for when they were doing the touring. So when the Darth Vader would come to malls and stuff during Empire or Empire. He had one for the Pittsburgh area, and it announces that Darth Vader is going to be at the store, blah blah blah. And there's photos. It was like they gave away like this Factor's photo of Darth Vader, and that was, you'd get that signed. But there was one of those as part of the display. It was sort of embedded in there. It was sort of homemade, but looked decent. It was printed and all that, and I like that a lot because I saw that tour when I was a kid, and it came to my local mall. The photos they gave away at my mall were not the same as the ones that they gave away in the Pittsburgh area because mine wasn't that Factors. It was I had like a black and white bust of Darth Vader. They signed it Vader, and I got that. Some of the best things I got that I bought his photo album. It had tons of photos. It wasn't just photo; it was like photo and like a scrapbook.
Right.
And,
yeah.
There were letters in there that he had written to Steve Danny and Steve Sansweet and stuff, and photos from his kids' birthday parties and whatnot. And I was surprised that those things were in there. Like the kids didn't want them, but I sort of heard later on that the Star Wars collection was actually sort of a dividing line between these kids and himself because he spent so much time on it. Then he was sort of like neglecting being a dad.
Oh no!
And he did spend a lot of time with all these. He with setting up dioramas and doing the artwork and stuff. And I bought his inventory, which was amazing. I mean, the guy had great penmanship. I think he was a drafter, and he had on yellow legal pad ruled paper. Like he did the equivalent of like an Excel inventory, but it's all handwritten. Or if there was pictures that he cut out of a catalog or something, he'd put pictures of things and, use those as like the description beside it, or he'd just make out lists of things. And, he would note, if he had everything on it, or like he'd put X, he'd write them all out and he'd put X's beside the ones he had. And it was very meticulous. He'd write down what he paid for things, and it was all like perfectly handwritten, block lettering. And it was huge. This is like a 3-inch thick binder. And I went back and forth with a guy. We were bidding, and then it turned out, I ended up winning it, but it turned out it was like a local Pittsburgh area dealer.
Same thing.
That sold him a ton of stuff over the years and really worked with him on his collection. He was pretty bummed. He was like, "Why do you want this thing?" I'm like, I just really respect the guy, and I just think it's a really interesting piece of history here. So
that's cool. So
got that, and then the scrapbook and stuff. So, and they got all these. When I mentioned before about the videotapes, when they would trade for their collections, I got about a dozen of those from different collectors. Because I was going through it, I was like, oh my gosh, I know who all these people are, and it's really kind of boring stuff. We actually, after the fact, we went to Bill Cable's house, a bunch of us, and we popped some of those in and watched them. But I think at the time, Sharon, my wife, who's my wife now, we about 2 years into dating, she's been cool with everything. It was always cool with everything. She'd been to I think it was Celebration 5 at that point and some other stuff. But she was like looking at us like we were crazy because you're watching like there's like no. I think maybe there was Star Wars music, dubbed in on it, but it was just like a videotape, and it's like sort of handheld, and they'd like show an item on a shelf, and then hit pause and switch the item out and hit record, and then it just go from item to item, or they do a like slow pan across items to show what they got. Sometimes Steve Denny would talk, he'd narrate it, but anyway, it was
Chris,
so we watched that.
I did put out the open call about 5 months ago saying, if anybody has any of those tapes, I will pay to get them digitized.
Yeah, I remember.
Are you not interested in doing that? You don't want to share?
I summarily forgot, and I'm like, I know people have bugged me about it before. They're like, "Oh."
But I'm saying I'll pay for it. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, I'll do all the work. But like, I think that stuff has intrinsic value to it because it's this pre-internet time, and everything that's pre-internet is interesting. So, anyways,
we'll talk later.
Because
Ellie's been bugging me.
I'm not trying to buy something from your collection, Chris. So it could happen. So.
Anyway, so I ramble a lot. But anyway, so just like lot after lot after lot, there was tons of books, tons of modern. I was staggering. I was genuinely shocked at the prices that the post 2002 era toys were going for. I mean, over retail price. And I thought for sure when I walked in, I was like, they're going to take a bath on all this stuff. And they didn't. He actually made money on stuff that he had bought. So, and I think a lot of that sold to people who just like came because it was cool Star Wars stuff. And there was just a room full of Star Wars items. And, there were some people bidding on the phone with friends of theirs. I remember Todd Chamberlain had called in. I think Martin was bidding on some stuff for him. And, but yeah, it was, I don't know how many tables full of items it had. If it was just like a regular 8-foot table, like you'd see at a toy show, there were probably, 30 of those tables. They brought his furniture in, which I thought was really cool, that hand-painted furniture, like shelves. There was a desk, a couple of different display cases, very cool painting with like, like galaxies and stuff on them and planets and things. Really neat. Those all sold. They were really cool, but it was like, you'd have to have a car there to get it out. I think it would have done better, if they had somehow had online bidding. So they sort of didn't do as well as they could have, but it was great because if you were there, then, you had final say on, what you were bidding on and how much you wanted to pay, and there was no secrets, so.
Right.
It was great. It was really amazing to see all that stuff. And they literally, at the end, they were whittling it down and whittling it down and whittling it down. And when it was over, it was like every table was empty. I mean, it was pretty epic. Well, and sort of like the last, one of the big old school collections, you were there to see it sort of getting dispersed.
Yeah, I think as I'm constantly trying to shove narrative onto random events, but like the fact that it was 2011, so it's the year before 2012 and Disney buys Star Wars, and it's like, 2008 they tried to do the big fancy auction house and it didn't work, and it's 2017 now, and Pete will tell us all about how it works just fine, thank you. And so like this is like the funky dunky auction, just like of one of the great sort of Mount Rushmore of old time collectors, he'd be up there, and just the idea that it was sold in a Marriott and sold like this, there's a kind of beauty to it that does make it seem like it was sort of the last of its kind, like sort of the last time Star Wars could be kind of funky and sold in an empty ballroom. I don't know, Steve, am I going too far?
No, I mean, you've even posed some crazier narrative arcs before, so I think that one makes some sense.
Now, Chris, speaking, because we do have to get on to Ron and to talk about PCA, and this is supposed to be Pete's episode to shine, and I don't think he's talked yet.
Wait a minute. There was another giant auction. It was in Baltimore area. It used to call Bill Will. That was like 2-3 years ago. A lot of guys showed up for that. I didn't go to that, but it was like General Toys. This guy who was like, in his 80s or something, and he was either getting rid of it or he had passed. There was a massive, massive toy auction, vintage toy auction. Again, it's one of those things. It's like if you're dealing with a company, they don't want to deal with online bidding, then your whole crew, your audience is whoever's going to show up live.
Right.
And that was one of the things at the Dewey Shoemate auction. That was 2015. He was a Kenner guy, and he was the auctioneer that was, or the real estate, the estate sale company that he was working with. They had listed some of this property, and they mentioned it on Auction Zip, and word got around, and that there was some estate sale coming up, and it was some Kenner employee, and I remember calling the guy up, Max Webster was his name, that ran the auction, and we're talking about some of the things he had. And I said, this is a estate sale. Are you going to do anything online? He's like, no. It's like, okay, I'm going to fly in. He's like, what? You're going to fly here for this thing? I said, yeah. So we talked numerous times after that, and I said, if you really want to help this guy out, you need to do an online auction. So that was one where it would have been a local thing, and I know if the Ohio locals had, if the word hadn't gotten around, it would have been an Ohio thing. Guys like the Lemcools and Bill Wills and stuff would have had some, word of mouth local and gone up there and scored some things. But for the estate broker, he did well by the family because he got word out, and, he did it through the site highbid.com. But basically it was, online bids at that point. And people worldwide were bidding. So prices were really pretty strong. I felt pretty strong at the time. I think they made in excess of $60,000, where, if he would have just sold those at some estate sale, if nobody would have known about it, and he sold them at an estate sale, he may have pulled in a few $100s, because people wouldn't have really known what the stuff was. So it really matters. I think, there's a time and a place for auctions, but I think it also matters. You got to get things in front of the audience, and your audience isn't necessary. Your audience is never who's standing in that room. You're never going to get all your core hardcore bidders, with it being like in a specific geographic location. You have to do things online, take online bids, take phone bids. And you see that like with the recent Hakes auction, they promoted the heck out of that, and they're having a live. I think it's a live auction, and it was, phone and internet bids, and most bigger auction houses are doing that. Some of them you'll see the items on eBay. It's on eBay, it's on iCollector, it's on their own site. They got all the avenues open.
Right.
Taking bids from everywhere. So,
awesome. Well, Chris, I think we need to get to Ron, or else he's going to get grumpy or fall asleep or both.
Right.
Did you want to hype that thing that you're going to be doing in the near future, or are you going to not want to talk about that?
In the future. In the future.
I mean, because that would narratively, it would be nice to end it with you saying that you're going to be doing.
It would
a new
be,
auction.
but like I said, it was just.
But you're not ready.
Coincidental, but
okay.
Yeah, but soon.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, then, in that case, I might even have to take out that little oblique reference. In which case, people will just hear me saying oblique reference.
Yeah, probably.
Yes. When dealing with Chris Georgoulias, silence is golden. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for telling us about what was it? 4 auctions I'd never heard of, Steve.
It was a lot more than we originally thought. So it's always good.
Something like that.
Yeah, it was up there.
Okay, so before we finally let Pete actually speak and talk about Hakes and Nigo.
Okay. Nico.
Chris Georgoulias. We're going to have to go back to the first great failed auction house, Chewbacca. Star Wars auction with PCA with Ron R.A., Ron Salvatore. So good night to you, Chris. And when we come back from the break, we'll be talking to Ron. We were talking about the 2008 Premier Collectible Auction. And what was it that you just said?
So I think, the main point of what I was trying to kind of convey there is that auction in itself is just, it's a once-in-a-lifetime type of situation. It's so special in so many ways, and even all three rounds of these Hakes auctions combined are going to, sum up to what that one auction was in itself in terms of the breadth and the depth and just the overall uniqueness of the event itself. So that's kind of, I'm really excited to hear Ron's take on this and, somebody who saw some of this stuff firsthand or dealt with it firsthand, because for some reason, this auction, I was collecting pretty heavily in 2008, and it missed me and a lot of the Star Wars community, and I think it's because it was done at Comic-Con,
right.
Which at the end of the day, there's a lot of crossover, but there's not always crossover. So that's one of those things that is always interesting about this is not a lot of people that I know actually went.
Right, and I would have gone. I had this terrible thing where I was in Celebration Europe. I was in California for Celebration Europe, and I was in Europe for San Diego Comic-Con. And so I missed both of those things. And I remember this auction was going to happen, but at the time, the prices were just ridiculous, Steve. I mean, seriously, think about this asking price. This is the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, okay? This is the starting bid, okay? The starting bid for a double telescope and Luke Skywalker AFA 85 was $7,000. Isn't that just the craziest thing you've ever heard, Steve?
Absolutely insane.
I mean, who could possibly afford that? Steve, they have the audacity to offer original hand-drawn droids art when the starting bid is almost $4,000, Steve.
It's just out of control.
Just grotesque. So, yeah, we're going to get Ron to talk about that and what it was like. But I just wanted to get a little bit hyped because this is one of my favorite items in my whole collection is the Premier Collectible Auction's catalog.
Yeah, right.
Now, I got to find that Leonardo DiCaprio catalog. That's got to be interesting.
For sure.
And actually, one more thing I wanted to say. Pete, are you good starting the auction house on the archive?
Yeah, I can definitely look at it. We can figure out some place to house it and have some type of central area with that, because these are special events.
Right.
They only come around every couple of years typically, and it's a different breed all unto itself.
So the auction house, which we'll have to come up with a better name for it, is going to be a centralized hub on the Star Wars Collectors Archive, provided that that Gus and everyone agrees. But the idea would be you would have like collected realized prices. You would have scanned catalogs. It would just sort of be like a history of the Star Wars auction, which is basically what we're doing on the podcast today, but this would be it in internet form.
Right.
So if you think that's a good idea, email Pete at pete.fitzy@gmail.com.
.org. Yeah.
So let's get Ron on here. He's probably excited to talk to us about this, although Ron usually voices excitement by sounding like he's not excited. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to see. Through the magic of the add button, as Steve calls it, I'm going to hit add. I'm going to take another bite of my Dole banana. It's a good thick banana, The last when I got it from Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe's has the worst produce. Even their bananas aren't good. This is from Wegmans. It's a Wegmans banana. It's girthy. It's good. Is Ron there? We're talking, Ron. I don't know what you think about it, but about having Pete work on creating some kind of like centralized history of the Star Wars auction somewhere on the archive.
Oh, really?
What do you
That'd
think?
Be cool.
Yeah, it'd be cool, right?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. It'd be another great thing on the archive that it seems that nobody cares about.
Yeah, well, probably. Just disappear into the ether.
Speaking of which, let's keep going with the podcast. So, Ron,
so
we're talking about the Premier Collectible Auctions. It was called the greatest toy auction on Earth. And very few people... It? Yes, that was its official tagline. Very few people actually went there, and you Ron were one of them. So tell us about it.
Yeah, the Premier. That's what the title was. Premier Collectible Auction.
Yeah. I guess we usually just call it the San Diego auction, right?
All right. Well, I can't remember. It was. I mean, Tom Derby ran it basically. It was 2008, summer of '8, in San Diego during Comic-Con. And really, that was the main reason I went to Comic-Con that year. That was the only time I ever went, just to see this auction. It took place like days after Celebration Japan, so I didn't go to that because that's dumb. I went to this auction, and then but Chris Georgoulias went to Japan, and like Fluffy went, and then those guys flew. I think they flew directly from Japan to San Diego. So they were on like the second leg of their whole thing, and I met up with them out there. You know, I can't remember. I don't think Todd Chamberlain was there. I'm pretty sure he wasn't there. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool. It was over a couple of days at least, 2 or 3 days, and it wasn't just Star Wars. So it was like G.I. Joe. I remember there was Ghostbuster stuff, all sorts of toy lines there.
Right.
And it was.
I mean, there's crazy stuff like original Transformers art. So if you remember what it the awesome art on Transformers, they had the original art for that. I mean, I'm leafing through it now. This is the first time I've ever seen graded video games for sale.
That was the first time I remember seeing that too. I remember being astonished at how the values on those things, because I'd never really thought about that before. But it was, I think Tom sort of intended it to be like a giant toy auction and also sort of a kickoff to like a new phase of his business or something. And it was a good idea, but he couldn't get, like, I guess to get in the convention center itself, there's all these, you have to pull a bunch of strings and stuff, and he couldn't get that. So it was down the street. It was like a few blocks away. So that was one setback, and and then the question is, how do you advertise it? It's like then toy nerds knew about it, but if you were just some random dude who was out at San Diego, you wouldn't necessarily know about it. I mean, if you were just there to see whatever, how would you know that down the road was this toy auction, and were you interested enough to go down there? You pretty much had to be into it to go. So that was kind of an Achilles heel to the whole thing, I guess. So I remember the first day it started. Plus, the other thing is it started in the morning. And like San Diego is kind of like partying, so people are up late drinking, and this thing started. It must have been at 8:30 or 9 in the morning, and I just remember the first day. Literally the only two people sitting there were Chris and I.
Oh my God.
Sitting there. I'm not even exaggerating. I don't think there was anybody else there, and they're sitting there auctioning these things, and the ladies. They had an auctioneer who's reading out the names of the stuff and going once, going twice, and there's no one there. And so the bids were coming in on the phone or through the internet. So people were bidding on things, but it was like just actually in the room there was nothing going on. But it was set up super nice, and it was like really beautifully presented. So it was this whole upper floor of a building that they rented out. Everything was in acrylic, and that was pretty rare at the time to see everything. I think they had every toy just about graded in an acrylic. So I mean, I think it was Todd DiMartino's collection basically. He was selling it because the book was coming out, and that was I did a whole bunch of video. I have a whole video I made of the whole thing. I could send you.
Yeah.
And I talked to Todd, and I was like, "Why are you selling your collection?" He's like, "Well, I'm moving on to the book,
There is in the catalog there is an ad for the book. Now we don't talk a lot about the book because at least I don't like disparaging people trying to do interesting things in the hobby. So he gets disparaged.
Yeah, I like Todd. I'm a supporter of Todd and his book, so I don't have any negative things to say. But at that time, we were supposedly getting the book pretty soon, so that and that was a while back. So, so I think that was part of his rationale for selling it. So I mean, he had a great collection. So there was just everything you'd want to see. I don't remember exactly what was there. Like someone was like, "Oh, did they have this?" Like I don't remember, but it was pretty much the whole line, all in acrylic.
Right.
And then all the other lines too, like He-Man and all this other stuff. But there was a ton of Star Wars. And then there were some super rarities like Robert Levine, who was the owner, I think he still owns it, of the carded rocket-firing Boba Fett.
Mm-hmm.
He had that up for auction, but I don't think that nobody bid on it.
No, yeah, that was the opening bid was $100K on that. So that's a Star Wars carded Boba Fett. And that was a Toy
Which
Fair
came
sample,
from
right?
Eric Janicki a few years earlier, and then I think Robert also had, there was like an Italian store display that was a cardboard fold-up Jabba's Palace.
Yeah, that thing was in there, and that thing was sweet.
Yeah,
and that was
really
all
nice.
in acrylic.
It was really nice. Yeah, I don't think that went anywhere either. I don't think, but a lot of stuff didn't really get bids, so it was just kind of like the big things just came and went without getting any bids. Tom Nyheisel, like what was left of his stuff, including like a lot of the droids and Ewoks, like card art paintings.
Right.
None of those got bids at the opening bids, whatever they were. They just kind of passed.
Yeah, we were saying that. Yeah, basically $3,700 could have got you almost any droids and Ewoks art, and they just weren't bid on.
No, I don't think that's true. What were the minimum bids?
Well, if they were unproduced, there were more. But like Low Gray, as an example, was $3,700, $500. Wicket original art was $3,700, $500. Bondo was $7,000. Shitter was $7,000. Morag was $7,000.
I guess, but I mean, yeah, they didn't get any bids. The big action was on the A-Wing art, which Gus Lopez won. I mean, and I think it was like 20-something thousand, and that at the time was like, holy cow. But now it was like
21,000.
Yeah, I just remember being like, oh my god, like that. That's something that it seemed to set a new standard for what people would pay for stuff. But now it seems like, Gus was pretty smart, obviously, because now it doesn't seem like that much. But also the 12-back art of like the land speeder and the TIE fighter and stuff. I think Gus won that, although he split it with someone, and that went really high too. So that was where the big action was on those two things.
Yeah, that went for $41,000 a lot with the TIE fighter, the X-wing, and the land speeder.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're picturing the back of a 12-back figure, there's little drawings, and they won the original art of that drawing, and the double telescoping and a telescoping lightsaber as well.
Right.
So
yeah,
they essentially got $10,000 a piece, which is still a steal. And did the original Anakin Skywalker art go up too?
I think it did. Did Gus get that? I can't remember now.
I just don't know if that's sold or not, because it's listed here as an opening bid of $15,000.
I'd have to go back and look at my video. I can't remember. I mean, Gus. My memory is that really the only big pieces like that were won were ones that Gus won in the auction. I don't remember any other ones really selling. So all the Nyheisel stuff was at the end was just kind of like nothing got bid on, and it was just still sitting there that like the last day of the show when they were breaking everything down.
What do you think, Pete? I mean, do you have the catalog in front of you, or do you have it?
Yeah, I've got the catalog, and then I've got the results too. I mean, and the catalog is where I kind of measure like where I call it one of the best we'll ever see, if not the best we'll ever see, just in terms of breadth and depth. And Ron touched on it. It's not just Star Wars; it's so many different lines that were up and listed there. But getting to the Star Wars stuff, he's right. It was a couple, big 5-figure purchases, I guess, in this case by Gus. There are one or two others, I think, but not anywhere near what Gus dropped on those couple. And a lot of the stuff just didn't go anywhere. But, I mean, looking at the prices and looking at the breadth of some of the stuff that went in the Star Wars category, it's just pretty amazing. I mean, so many different, like, one-of-a-kind or probably 2 or 3-of-a-kind pieces, the big proof sheets, and all that stuff went for really good prices into, the mid-$500 to $1,000 range. So
let's give a couple examples, Pete, if you can.
Yeah, so one really big one. So a cromlin of the Falcon. Actually, I'd have to pull it up in the catalog just to make sure this isn't a cromlin of the back of it, because I know I saw something along those lines in here. Actually, let's just move on to something that's a little bit more concrete. So the proof sheet for Return of the Jedi for the AT-AT, so the big proof sheet, gigantic, 25 by 35, went for $650. There's maybe a pair, 3 of them out there that I know of, but then again, if the black hole collectors, maybe there's 5 or 6 total. But pretty rare piece, really big piece, really nice piece. Something that would easily sell in the $3,000 range today to the right collector, probably $2,500 on an average day.
Right.
But, I mean, so many pieces from the Revenge line, box flats and stuff. A couple Revenge box flats, the INT4 and the MTV7, both going for $375. Probably close to $1,000 pieces today to the right collector, $800 on an average day and stuff. So, some appreciation over time, a lot of appreciation over time on some of the other stuff. But when you start to factor in the artwork and all the stuff that didn't sell, and the fact that a lot of those things, would be such a bargain today, it just kind of bites you. And it's like you'll never see all those pieces together like that, because it was the completeness of everything production-wise, the adding in of some really, really rare stuff, and then you had, just to sprinkle on it, like 100 pieces that were probably, anywhere from that 4 to 5 of a kind range. So it's pretty incredible to look at this and see it, and see how well the catalog was put together too.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a great catalog.
I mean, you could just go through. I mean, unsold Rocket Fett for $10,000. A sold Rocket Fett AFA-85 for $11,500, which even back then was cheap, right? I mean, they were already going for 15 or 16 in 2008, weren't they?
I don't know if that's true. I mean,
okay.
If they were going for 15 or 16, I don't think it would have sold for only 11. I mean, someone would have bid on it. But,
okay.
I mean, it definitely wasn't anything like it is now.
And then even some weird props and stuff, like the Chewbacca's teeth sold for $2,000.
Oh, yeah. I remember that there was Indiana Jones's boxer shorts, Harrison Ford's boxer shorts. I think that was from Fluffy, and that didn't get bid on. There's just a lot of weird stuff in there. I remember a lot of stuff like the Ghostbusters Fearsome Flush figure, like getting bid up really high, and I remember the G.I. Joe USS Flag going up to like $12,000, which seemed crazy at the time. There was just a whole bunch of stuff that people went through. It was like a blur after a while, especially since there was nobody there. I mean, on the best time, it was like, I would say a quarter filled as far as the seats went, and it was mostly people that you and I know. There was very few random people there. But then the good action happened at the last day, with a lot of the leftover Nyheisel stuff. Tom Derby had called Tom Nyheisel, and Tom Nyheisel agreed to sell some things direct that hadn't sold, and so people bought a lot of the artwork stuff on the last day outside the auction itself.
So yeah, that's what fascinates me. So it's the last day, the auction's over, and like, so I mean, and you ended up with a piece this way, right?
Yeah, I got the Imperial Sniper artwork for, I think it was $3,000.
Okay.
I didn't really go for Droids and Ewoks piece. Just wasn't as keen. The unproduced ones went for, I don't remember what it was, 5 or 6 or something like that. And a lot of those sold. I remember John Alvarez sitting there on the phone trying to sell his bootleg collection to get up the money to buy one of those pieces. But, I wanted a movie line item, so I always liked that body rig artwork, so I got that Imperial Sniper piece. And, those prices seemed like a good deal at the time. Obviously they were, but, I mean, you're probably shaking your head and thinking how crazy, but at the same time, I mean, you have to remember Tom Nyheisel had that stuff for a while,
right?
And it sat around. And then the auction was supposed to be like the big hurrah, where it's like, well, it's now or never. I'm going to sell this stuff, and it got like no bids. Like a lot of it just got nothing. And the movies were out of theaters. It was 2008. It seemed like things were in a downturn. So, from Tom's perspective, well, I guess now or never. If people are willing to pay, I might as well unload some of these. Of course, 9 years later, that seems like a bad idea, but at the time, it wasn't that.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't that crazy. But so yeah, I ended up with that, but I didn't bid on anything in the auction.
Wow, so you sat there for like 3 days and didn't bid?
Oh yeah, I don't think I saw anybody bid. I remember Chris Nichols won a Bacano Jawa, which is ridiculous because he probably has 10 of them already. And then that was funny. I have a video of him sitting there. I was like, "Don't you have that?" And he goes, "Yeah, I have several." I was like, "Where the hell did you bid?" I remember Shane Turgeon won some G.I. Joe item. I don't think anybody else who you're friends with bid on anything. It was just basically there, like watching.
Right.
Most of the action was on the phone, or through the internet. So it was just really weird. Like you have to ask Tom how he feels, Tom Derby, about how he feels about the whole thing. But really, I'm not sure it made a lot of sense in the end. It was a good idea that didn't really pan out because he could have probably just put it online, or he probably could have done just as well on eBay on some of that stuff, or setting up his own auction and running it completely online, because most of the action was from people who weren't in the room.
Right.
And it really just, even if you say like, oh, we're going to do this as an advertising and a display thing, I don't think there was enough people who visited that auction. It was unfortunate because people didn't see how impressive it was. It was a small group of people who saw it. It was, it was really cool. I have, like I said, video and pictures I can send you.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd be comfortable with us uploading it to the Kivecast page, I mean, I tried to get Chris to agree to digitize all those old collector videos. I think you can predict how far that got.
Oh yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, but
yeah, I can send you the video. I have it.
Yeah, well, I think
it's like a whole video of Comic-Con.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
It was a really cool auction, and like Pete said, probably the best we'll see of that kind of thing. And it's just unfortunate that one, we'll never see that again, probably, and two, at the time there just wasn't that many people there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it was tough too, because I mean, I'm sure that this was planned out, a year and a half advance, and you get to the summer of 2008, and you're in the midst of the economic downturn as well. This is really when the tide started to turn with the hobby for 2-3 years, and everything completely reset itself. Not just in Star Wars, but across all toy collecting and all collecting in general, when everything kind of went to hell.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period between, when did Rancho Obi-Wan open? 2010?
I think it was 2010. Yeah.
I mean, between 2006 or 7 and maybe 2011, it was things just seemed kind of okay, well, Star Wars is kind of done and in the doldrums, and this stuff was still popular and worth money, but it didn't seem. Nobody realized that there was an explosion imminent as far as that goes. I mean, I remember being at Rancho Obi-Wan, and that's why I brought that up, because I remember being there and talking about something, whether Star Wars is ever going to come back, and debating whether Lucas's kids would, once he was not around, release more movies. And at that point, yeah, I mean, maybe Star Wars would come back in 10, 15 years, but I certainly wasn't thinking, oh, The Force Awakens, Disney's going to buy it, The Force Awakens is going to come out, and there's going to be this, giant boom in a few years. Nobody really foresaw that necessarily. What the hell was that?
What is happening?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just playing with my Porg. It's on the table here while I'm recording.
Good God.
You want to know the future of Star Wars, gentlemen?
Oh,
the sound of the future of Star Wars.
I will seriously kill you. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of what the context of that auction, and it's just at the time, it was not surprising that Neuheisel's stuff didn't really blow anyone's doors off, because he'd had it and it had been available for a while, or it had been semi-available at least, and it hadn't really done anything at the prices he was asking. So I know now it seems like, oh geez, I can't believe it, but at the time it was like, oh yeah, well, here we go again with this stuff, and it's still priced above what people want to pay.
Yeah.
And so it didn't surprise anyone. And then his agreeing to sell some things directly at slightly lower prices wasn't surprising either. It seemed like a logical thing to do. So I like the piece I got. It's hanging at my place.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's enough of a prelude to finally allow Pete to actually talk about these other auctions. So
Are we sure? I like listening to Ron.
Yeah, I know everyone likes listening to Ron.
Not really. Yeah, man, go for it. But that's my story about the 2008 Premier Collectibles Auction. That's what it was called.
Yeah.
Yes.
PCA.
Yeah, that could be a problem. It sounds like a fake auction. It's like, yeah, we're the Premier Collectible. Even their logo looks kind of like a little bit budget.
Well, if you're a collector and you have a interest in building a library of collecting resources, that's a good catalog to hunt down. I'm sure it's out there, and it's certainly a great resource. So I would recommend finding that one.
Hey, speaking of which, do you have the Leonardo DiCaprio catalog?
I don't think I have that one.
Okay.
To be honest, I remember hearing about him selling his stuff, but I don't remember actually browsing an auction. I have no memory of that.
Okay.
So, but I do remember him being a collector and him selling his stuff. There was also an auction of this is the late '90s of the all-time Star Wars movie poster and theater display auction, which there was a catalog for. I think it was called the Star Wars Reference Collection, and it was just movie posters and standees and stuff. Yeah. And I have that catalog. That was pretty cool. So that's another one you can try to hunt down. But I wasn't involved in that. I just have the catalog.
Okay. Well, now I think it's time, Steve.
Yes.
We can finally take the jump over what is clearly the divide. The 2012 is. I think we just now have to just call that the cleavage date. Oh my Jesus, Steve. What's wrong with me? The cleavage date.
Roll with it.
Yes, the cleavage date. Because, cleavage means the separation between two sides, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. The cleavage date between the massive and bounding different sides of this cleavage. The pre-Disney and the post-Disney. So we're now talking to Fratastic Pete, who's been here the whole time. Tell us about... give us a short, brief 2-hour history of Star Wars auction house auctions since the Great Cleavage.
Since 2012, there hasn't been a ton that's been significantly different in the hobby. I mean, I think the biggest things are you have, Sotheby's getting into it back in 2015 or so, with the Return of Nego auction that went on, and that was an interesting event unto itself. You had a high-profile individual overseas selling off here domestically, but globally at the same time, because Sotheby's is this global entity. So you had that. Over the last 8 years or so, you've had different auction houses and stuff like Vectis that have really put a lot of time and effort into it and have annual or semi-annual auctions. But nothing quite to the extent of what you've seen at a Sotheby's or what we saw here recently with Hakes. And I keep wanting to call him Hanks. I don't know why. I think Hakes just it doesn't roll off the tongue at the end of the day. But I mean, those guys, they put together a really interesting package. They marketed the hell out of this auction. I mean, I remember going to King County almost 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and they already had a presence there set up, trying to sell the the auction, the big pieces that they knew were going to be in there and everything, because they were still kind of working through all the details. But they carried that through, Celebration. I think it was James Gallo had the book at his booth to kind of pump that up. And then you saw just flyers everywhere and a lot of social media through, the various techniques that they use to market all the other things they do. Because these guys do all kinds of, I hate the term Americana, but collectibles, whether it's sports related, whether it's, racing related, whether it's toy and comic book related. They do a little bit of everything. And this was their first jump really into a really, really big toy heavy type of auction like this.
Yes. You there? Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm used to me not talking, but this is finally your time to shine, Pete.
No. So, just kind of looking at it from kind of end to end and everything, it was a really interesting event unto itself. And the fact that they've split it up over 3 different auctions is very smart on their behalf, because, they'll get a lot more runway out of this. But I think I
didn't even know that. So there's going to be 3 of these?
Yeah, so this is the first of 3. So what they did is, across all of these, if you can, let's just say compared to like some of these other auctions, like the original Nego auction with Sotheby's way back in the day. I don't even think we've touched on it, and I'd have to do some research, but it was the one Steven actually shot over to us today via IM. That particular one, you had a full set of the 3-packs and all these really, really high-end pieces. This is going to have a set of the 3-packs, but it's going to be broken up over 3 different auctions. It's going to have all 3 double telescopings, but it's going to be 1 at each auction. Mm-hmm. So they'll run this through basically 2018, and they'll continue kind of the marketing campaign that they've been doing with it, and kind of, pumping up their style of auction, which, bears just a second to kind of pause on, because as we're talking about all these other auctions that have taken place, a lot of these are live auctions with people bidding on the phone, bidding online, bidding in person. This Hakes auction actually was not a live auction in the traditional sense in terms of function, in that there wasn't anybody there, bidding live. It was all done online. It was all done. I think they have a phone number. I'd have to double check. It's just kind of an archaic process. I don't know a lot of people that use that versus the internet at this point in time, especially when they have a good interface like what Hakes does. But the other side of how they're different is that bidding can progress in terms of that ending time. The closer and closer it gets to, that last bid time, which was supposed to be noon the day of the actual auction. Well, if somebody comes in at 11:55 and drops another bid on an item, they extend it out another 3 hours, and that creates it's an interesting dynamic, and I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this too, because if I'm really going after something, it just irritates the hell out of me, because I might have to watch that for like 12 hours straight. I think they have a cutoff sometime that evening where they won't take any more bids, period. But there is that chance that something that's supposed to end at noon could get strung out another, 8, 10, 12 hours or something like that.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, for some of these crazy ones that you've listed in your blog post, like the double telescoping Ben Kenobi. So there was a carded one of those that sold for $76,000, and that was the big ticket thing for this first part. But I wonder, like, how long that was drawn out with the way that the format worked.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head how far this went out. This one went past the set time, needless to say. That happened with almost all of the real high test stuff that was out there. But this got drug out a few hours, I know, at least. But an amazing piece. You don't see them very often, but then you go back to like the PCA auction, and I think that one sold there for like 15, or they were trying to sell one there for 15. And you just look at the appreciation over 10 years. It's crazy.
Wait, a double telescoping OB1?
Yeah, I think the PCA auction had all 3 of them there.
Yeah, it says it went unsold for $7,000. So unsold at $7,000. Oh, it does say it was an AFA no grade. So maybe that means it was.
Maybe there's something odd about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But definitely, Luke went for sold AFA 85, sold for 7.
Huh.
Yeah.
So. Yes.
Yeah, and so we'll see. We'll see how the Luke does in one of the upcoming ones. We'll see how the Darth does in one of the upcoming ones. But they've done a lot promoting this, and I think after chatting with a couple of guys at the last Kane show and just kind of getting some feedback from them, they were really looking at this to kind of launch them in long term into doing a lot of toy auctions, especially in the Star Wars vein. They just haven't been able to really seal the deal with anybody before this guy came along. I think, what's his name? Russell Branton.
Right. Who I've never heard of.
Yeah,
I haven't either. I just, for some reason, I just think of Russell Brand. Is this Russell Brand Star Wars collection?
You can't presuppose an existence of a god if you can't be free to love yourself sexually. Hey, that
Sorry.
was off the cuff. That was pretty good. Right?
That was.
I could bring back
good.
the porg if you want.
No.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, this guy kind of came out of nowhere. Nobody really knew a lot about him or anything like that. And I know they've done some interviews. You can go check them out on their site and everything about him if you want to learn a little bit more about him and stuff. I guess I just don't care. But just going through a lot of this stuff that went out there were a lot of good pieces this round, and then there's a lot of good pieces that we know are coming. The big things that are really high focus are the 3-packs, just because there's a full set, and then the double telescoping stuff. Yeah. But underneath that, you had stuff like the Anakin Skywalker Dynacast that went for $35,000. You had a lot of other really low count items, a 31 back Stormtrooper ESB proof. Stormtroopers, I think everybody knows, are extremely difficult to find any type of proofs of.
Wait, why is that?
Just overall, and I'm looking at like the Jedi line specifically. Okay. There's only a few 65 backs known. A lot of them were used for mock-ups and stuff like that. So there's only a couple of those left. The Revenge line, they're in line with everybody else. But then even on some of these ESB backs, you see lower counts of Stormtroopers than you do a lot of the other characters.
So you're saying back in 2015, when I was desperately trying to sell my Stormtrooper 21 back proof for $800, it's a good thing that I didn't?
Yeah, I would say that that's a good piece to be holding on to right now.
Like, I literally could not sell 2 21 back proofs for $2,000. There's an entire movie that was made about how hard it was for me to raise $2,000 with 4 21 back proofs. I couldn't do it.
That's because you had the crew with you. Nobody wanted you to actually fulfill your destiny. They just wanted the movie to keep going on. So.
Yes, thank you very much. Now that we've brought this back to me. Okay, so I didn't realize that this was a multiple stage. So now I feel bad because I feel like we're sort of like inadvertently advertising for it. But I guess that's okay if we do that.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to pass on a little love. I mean, it's not like we're.
No, Pete. We're not passing on love. I don't love these people. I don't know these people. Okay? One thing I know, Pete. People I love you. I love Steve. I love Ron. I love people I know. All right? Like dealers and people who sell me stuff. I don't know if I love them. We can't just throw that word around, Pete.
I guess we can't. General
Publicity.
Support and lack of unwillingness to create harm against or something.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they're doing an interesting, setup with this. And so we'll see how it goes long term, if they just kind of become the next Vectus and they just do like semi-annual stuff and whatever. But, this was an interesting set. There's obviously one auction in particular that has stirred up a lot of discussion. I don't know how much we want to talk about it just because it's been talked to death.
No, let's talk about it because, Pete, this is the audio magazine, so people will want to know what everyone was talking about.
That's very true. But there were a couple surprises in the auction. And that's the thing that I think everybody needs to take into context. And I was going to bring it up when Ron was on before, too. An auction is a time and a place and an event, and because it's not the norm, because it's not how people get the majority of what they have in their collections, they're not always top of mind, and a lot of people miss them. They miss the marketing for them. They miss the date that they're coming out. Whereas eBay is like ingrained into a lot of the buyers' minds, and that repetition of looking at that and all the signals that they'll send you to say, hey, something's coming up, there's an auction ending, whatever. There's a lot of eyes at one time on there, and there's an ease of accessibility. On the auction house's side, it's not something they do every day in these categories. With some very, very rare exceptions, there's some that do it a couple times a year. So a lot of people aren't always looking at these auctions, and so you get just crazy low bids on stuff, but then you get crazy high bids too because people just go nuts. It's hard to really explain at the end of the day some of the behavior that comes up, but it happens in almost every type of auction that you look at. If it's cars, if it's comic books, whatever, there's always that really crazy lunatic fringe type of bid that people put out there. And in this case, it was on condition. More than anything else, because it was just a Luke Skywalker 12-back C-back, which you see, you could go onto eBay right now and find 5 to 6 of them in decent condition. But because this is a 95, it went for ridiculous money comparative to anything else that's ever come along. 50 grand. And I did a couple comparisons on the article online kind of talking about how this compares to some other 95 mint on card auctions that have come along. And even when you compare it against other 95, which typically bring crazy money, for example, in this case, I looked at a Yoda 95 that sold this summer for, I think, like 500 or something like that. Let's actually go down and listen. Look, sorry, sold for $2,000, which was a 4x lift over, a normal everyday like AFA 85 Yoda. So if you look at that, and then you kind of look at it comparative to that Luke, it doesn't add up, because that Luke is like a 50x lift over what most 12C Lukes sell for in high condition. So yeah, it's out there on its own. I don't know. What did you guys think when you saw the numbers?
I mean, I didn't find it that. I can't say I found it that crazy, because and you wrote it in your article pretty well about it being the most iconic figure in the best condition. And, and it's not just about it. I'm a little bit more sympathetic towards grade thinking in cases like this, where it truly is probably actually rare. Like an AFA 85 or whatever, I don't think is rare. I just think some are graded and some are not. But for it to be in this good condition, and it appears to really be in that good condition. Like, I understand the weird sort of semi-erotic jollies that you get with something that's in that good condition. And to have it be that good of that figure, I mean, it's crazy. I'd rather buy photo art for that, and I'd rather buy 10. I'd rather buy a full 12-back set in AFA 80, right? You could probably do that for 50 grand. But I don't know. I don't even think I posted about it. I just sort of thought, oh yeah, that's crazy. How about you, Steve?
Well, yeah, I agree with you in the sense of like this is the penultimate example of that figure in the sense, at least like officially. But yeah, it's when Pete kind of broke down the rate of increase with these other things, that's where it still kind of threw me off. Like it is the top figure, but is it really, 50 times what, a slightly less nice one would go for? I don't know. That it's crazy. It's hard to grapple with. Especially
But here's the thing that blows my mind.
Yeah.
I bet if the person who bought that tries to sell it in 5 years, he could potentially double his money.
And
he could make more on his collection than I could make on selling my entire collection, raised with, that was bought with perspicacity and acuity and lots of other words. By the way, Steve, penultimate means second to last, not ultimate.
Whoops.
Just so you know.
Thanks.
But I'm on fire today. Am I always such a jerk? But
you know what I was getting at.
Yes. like it's the people who drop this kind of money that always end up making a big profit because there's other idiots like them. I mean, look at the rocket phenomena. That's going to keep going up because people go, that's the thing to buy, and then they're going to buy it, and the next guy shows up who's got a little bit more money and says that's the thing to buy, and then all of a sudden, if you bought a rocket fet for $30,000 right now, in 5 years you might be looking smart. So I don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the rarity of it, I mean, for people who actually, we don't talk about it in these terms in a lot of cases because it kind of hedges on a line, I think, that goes between hobby and investment, and that's more the investment that a lot of people put into their collections. And specifically, I mean, if you're going to invest in a collection, buying the absolute best quality of the most popular character is probably about the most common sense approach that you can actually take to getting into this, because it showed up time and time again, whether it's early Superman comics or whatever. That's what people gravitate to, and so I think that you're absolutely right. The people buying the rocket fets today, the people buying the high condition items like this, it's just going to continue to go up and up and up. If anything in the market has the ability to stay high, it's the rarest, highest demand, best condition items.
Right. So, yeah. So I suppose I'm not throwing my hands up and saying, "Oh my God, think of the children." But on the other hand, the double telescoping Obi-Wan for $76, that seems pretty crazy to me. A Boba Fett tri-logo, I don't care what color his knees are, for $11,000. Like those are the numbers that kind of drive me crazy.
Yeah, or the mini rig that sold for $1,500. Like that's that does kind of make your head spin more than the Luke in terms of just like, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, what really caught my attention with the mini rig too is that I actually bought the box flat for that piece last year and paid several hundred less than what somebody paid for a production piece like that.
Right,
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's well, Steve, you haven't got to say it the whole episode, so go ahead.
Oh man,
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Geez. Well, this was supposed to be a little blog log pod, but I think we turned it into something more interesting. So I think next time we talk about Hakes, maybe we'll get Paul Chu on to talk about his auctions. Maybe we'll get Todd Chamberlain on to talk about
Vegas.
Maybe we'll kind of start a little tradition here of the history of auctions, and it'll coincide with me volunteering Pete to do all this work.
Totally.
Awesome.
On board.
Cool. Well, we don't have any official outro, so is that just right, Steve? I just hit stop at a certain point?
I think so.
Okay.